Hello and welcome to the Building Sustainability Podcast with me, Jeffrey Hart. Every fortnight, join me as I talk to designers, builders, makers, dreamers and doers. Together we can explore the wide world of sustainability in the built environment by talking to wonderful people who are doing excellent things. Yes, welcome back. This is episode 106 with best-selling author and columnist Sally Coulthard. If you haven't heard episode 105 yet, then definitely go and start there. In this episode, we will be talking much more about biophilia and craft. I think the first episode will really set you up on that. Reminder that there are loads of links in the show notes, so you can go over and buy Sally's books. They're all through the Hive shop, which supports local bookstores as well as giving a kickback to this podcast. I think if you can buy secondhand, do that. But I think Hive is the next best option if you want to buy new. Also, reminder, check out nauticumcraftschool.com for a whole load of craft courses available in 2024. I hope to see you there. That's it. We are heading straight on in to the remainder of the conversation with Sally Coulthard. I'm back at the end. Enjoy the episode.
Coming back to this programme, I only caught 10 minutes of it this morning, but there is Radio 4 programme about why boring buildings are bad for us. You know, they had people on who were called things like what was the job title? Oh, that's it, neuroaestheticists, or they practice neuroaesthetics, which was an amazing crossover between neuroscience and the aesthetics. Basically, how things looked affected the brain. And there's loads of research that these people were doing, you know, really people who are medically, you know, trained, but saying, you know, different buildings have physiological responses, create physiological responses in people. And so much of modern architecture creates the wrong response or no response or poor responses in terms of stress and engagement and happiness and all these kind of things. And I think that's a really interesting and profound area of something to be looking at. I wrote a bit about that in Biophilia, you know, the idea that living spaces have a really profound effect on your well-being. And not just kind of like, you know, what colour wallpaper you had or whether you had, you know, a sparkly kitchen things, but more to things, you know, like the temperature of a building or whether it has fresh air flowing through it, or what your views were, what sounds did you hear, you know, as you were traveling through the building, you know, were the spaces kind of human sized, or, you know, I love all that idea. I love the sort of humanization of the building, the built environment, and the idea that we should be thinking, you know, about all those kind of different things, you know, our relationship with water or, you know, spaces or rhythms to do with, you know, night and day and light and dark and surprise, and then, you know, different emotions and stuff like that. It's, I think there's a lot of work to be done on that.
Yeah. Well, were these neuroscientists talking about sort of biophilia, or were they talking more?
Yeah, I think the emphasis of the program on the surface of it was why boring buildings. They were basically saying that, you know, most modern kind of urban buildings are tall, bland boxes made of glass, and so the emphasis was that he was trying to say that more buildings should be more fun and more engaging. And that was where his starting point was. But actually the things that he was talking about and the things that the experts he had on were talking about were things like, you know, do spaces make you feel well? Do they make you feel stressed? Do they make you feel engaged with you know, can you engage with the outside? You know, are your stress rates getting worse and all that kind of stuff? And I think that, you know, that's essentially biophilia. That's the core of kind of biophilic design, which I think I get the impression that more and more people, it's becoming more commonplace, even if people aren't using the word biophilia. The idea that you know, spaces should be somewhere that make us feel well.
Yeah.
And so many spaces don't. I think about hospitals that I've stayed in, or doctors' waiting rooms, or schools. I mean, most of my schools that I ever went to, when I went to a big state school, and that was just a kind of concrete box, and not somewhere that helped with concentration or making you feel calm and excited about learning, or all those kind of things. So there's some really fascinating research. I was reading about biophilia in children, especially, and about how profound the effects of buildings on children are, and also in return how play in nature is so important for children, and the types of play that kids do in nature is completely different than the kind of play that a lot of kids seem to do these days, which is very directed. It's very material based. So you play with toys, technology, that kind of stuff. And there's a research. The research was basically saying that kids who play in nature and take more risks, and a lot of the play is less gendered, because there aren't male and female objects in the natural environment. People learn to be more eco-conscious adults if they spent a lot of time as children playing in nature, and the play is often a bit more creative and free form, and you probably had the same childhood as me, which was kind of left to your own devices, really. And I spent a lot of time outside just kind of messing about, and I'm really glad I did. And I worry about kids these generations, who are endlessly entertained, and one way that's great, because they're obviously, I've got three girls and of different ages, and they're so switched on, and they're so advanced, I think, in terms of maturity than we probably were. But they don't really experience boredom or have that time to kind of make stuff up as they go along that we probably did, which I find, it'll be interesting to see what the outcome of that is.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, do you sort of push them outside to get some of that sort of play space, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, kids are brilliant, aren't they? Because whatever you try and do, they basically do it their own way anyway. So my three girls are very different, and my eldest, who's now just gone to university, I think never really. She likes the aesthetics of nature and being in nature, but she's not really interested in being outdoorsy. Whereas the other two are a bit more outdoorsy. But I do wonder if sometimes, it's maybe an age thing as well. When they were really little, they were quite outdoorsy and spent a lot of time outside. But they're going through that stage at the moment where a lot of time is spent indoors. But we'll see. Yeah, I think they'll appreciate it when they're not here. When they're living in some London flat, staring out into onto a grey pavement, they'll miss it. That's what I keep telling myself.
With biophilia, I mean, do you remember how you kind of were introduced to it?
I think I must have. I think when I actually was doing research really early on for this book I wrote about kind of organic living and natural materials and stuff, I think I must have come across the term then. And then probably kind of, I read a lot, and I think I must have kind of come across the term at some point in my research. But it was always used as quite a sort of kind of esoteric, very sort of architecturally based term. It didn't seem to have much relevance for, the average person living in a semi or whatever. And so at the time, the whole idea for the book was in my approach was to make it a really everyday idea, and to show how applicable it was to every aspect of your working life or daily life, whether it is, using tech before you go to bed, or what temperature you had your bedroom, all those kind of things. But also to kind of pull together as much of the kind of decent research that was around, to show that it wasn't just a kind of another, feng shui or whatever. And not that I don't really know anything about feng shui, but and I actually do think there's something about, there's something to the idea that a space needs to have flow, and I definitely agree with that. But the actual kind of the rational scientific explanation for me appeals, because then it could make me say, right, this is actually something that we can test and replicate, and therefore I'm not going to have to get through the barrier of convincing people that this is a good idea, because the science says it is. So it's like having an extra layer of kind of trustability to it.
Yes, and it can appeal to a much broader spectrum of people, can't it? Like
exactly.
the feng shui thing is probably very much an alternative mindset.
Exactly. And I don't think it helps that people kind of set themselves in one camp or the other, because actually there's a benefit to kind of to picking and choosing lots of different elements of kind of building ideas. But biophilia, and there's lots of different research that wasn't necessarily started out as biophilic research as such. So ideas about, there's been loads of kind of neurological studies about colour and about the effect of colour on the brain, or the effect of natural views on the brain, or, research that's been done by hospitals about the healing effect of looking out of the window onto greenery and things. And we've known that since medieval times, that, this is why monasteries and medieval hospitals were built around physic gardens in the middle, because the idea that looking upon nature and being close to it would be part of the healing process. And we now know that that's actually based in science. So to answer your question, the biophilia thing kind of came out of an interest to do with trying to make a kind of unrelatable idea, something that we could use in our homes. And it was really aimed at the domestic market. It wasn't designed for kind of architects building big office spaces. It was designed for you and me, in our houses. And really luckily, it came out about 2 weeks into COVID, when everyone was stuck in their house, when everyone was stuck in their houses. And so it really hit I think it was the first time that people have really ever spent any concentrated amount of time in their houses thinking, does this space actually, is this helping or hindering, how I'm feeling right now? And so there was quite a lot of interest on the back of that. I wouldn't have wished those circumstances on anybody, but it was strangely apt for the book that it came out at that time. And obviously there's been a huge kind of interest in, the last decade or so about indoor plants and people, making a big deal about sort of having lots of indoor plants, and especially kind of apartment living and trying to make it as kind of like an urban jungle and those kind of things. So I was trying to kind of tease all those elements together and see if I could come up with a kind of cohesive idea.
So here's the thing that's I've been discussing recently. I've seen a lot of plastic plants around, and the instant reaction is, a plastic plant. But then I've sort of, the more I've learned about biophilia, it's like, well, actually, I think that's probably giving you quite a good boost. But it feels very bad to be, singing the praises of a plastic plant. I can hear why the noises you're making.
Yeah, do you know, I've gone round in circles. So I shall confess, I do have fake flowers in my house. I am guilty, because I like the kind of decorative look of them. But actually, I don't think they have a biophilic effect in the same way that I write a bit about this in biophilia, that do fake materials have the same effect? So does wood laminate have the same effect as real timber and that kind of stuff? And I think the answer is probably no. That I think we are such sophisticated sensing humans, and our ability to discern between fake and fakery and reality is so good and so finely honed that I don't think we have the same reaction to fake plants that we do to real plants, because I think there's something much more sophisticated than just vision, or just I think things on a really micro level, like color perception or scent, or the fact that fake things are often too perfect, right? And I think our brains can sense that. And that imperfection is imperfection within general kind of ideas of perfection are the essence of kind of nature, and that we can spot a fake from a mile off, because often it's too perfect and doesn't quite feel right. So that's a very long-winded way of saying I don't think they're the same. But I understand why people do it. And also sometimes just, having real plants, looking after real plants is a commitment. And sometimes people kind of don't have that time. So I'm not going to be judgy about fake plants. There are worse things you can buy.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I know, if you have a photo of a landscape, it's supposed to have a good biophilic response. And then, sort of using patterns around the house. A pattern isn't a flawed and, a complex natural thing. It's a representation, and that is also having a good biophilic response. So sort of seems like it's going to do something, but as you say, probably not the full plant.
Yeah. You've hit the nail on the head, really, that, what you're talking about is probably the difference between the benefit of looking at a picture of the Alps and also actually being in the Alps and smelling the air and being, and the magnificence of it all. And they're not really comparable, but if you can only have the former, then have the former, because at least it's better than nothing. And you've got to be so realistic about, I write a lot about, ideal scenarios, whether it's biophilia or, organic materials or, pesticide. I write a lot about farming and smallholding and that kind of thing. And there's often quite a big difference between what the ideal scenario is and what people can actually afford or what they have access to. And I'm really aware of the fact that I'm writing from the middle of the North Yorkshire countryside, with lots of nice fresh air and green spaces and stuff. And I'm not having to be stuck in, a tiny flat in the middle of a really busy city and things. So I think you've got that's just something to be kind of mindful of.
Absolutely. If you had to pick a favourite way of introducing biophilia into a space, what would you go for?
Oh no, you've put me on the spot.
That sounds a bit like a proper interview question, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. Oh my God. Well, the thing that's kind of that's for the forefront of my mind is that most buildings are too hot. And so for me, fresh air, and that encompasses everything from, clean air through to breezes, through to natural light, through to having, a sense of kind of movement of air across your skin and all those kind of things. So many, I can't stand being in a hermetically sealed building. It actually makes me feel physically sick. And so many buildings are so hot as well. And if you're going to stay in a hotel, often the rooms are so hot at night time, and my body just doesn't work like that. I need to be quite cold most of the time, or at least cool. And I think we keep a lot of our spaces way overheated, and ecologically that can't be a good thing either. But I just think for our immune systems and just for our general health, I think we kind of, and then it makes you not appreciate. I'll talk about something called alesthesia in biophilia, which is this inherent pleasure that humans get from contrasts in temperature. So, it's like they being really, really, really hot, and then the deliciousness of jumping into an ice cold pool. That pool wouldn't be as good to jump in if it was just kind of averagely warm. It was a kind of tepid day. And so there's something about, if you have a building at a generally cooler temperature, then you can really appreciate things like open fires or spots of heat and that kind of stuff. And I think that's for me the kind of pleasure of a living space are those that kind of play with those temperatures and light and the kind of uniformity. Sorry, that's a long way. So yes, the short answer is buildings are too hot. Cool down. Open a window.
Brilliant. I wanted to sort of pull you back a little bit and talk to you about craft. We sort of started to get into it a little bit when we were talking about buildings and sort of the way that buildings don't really have the crafted elements anymore. Was that what brought you into writing crafted?
So crafted, I really enjoyed writing, and it's it must be quite old now. It must be maybe 6 or 7 years old, and the kind of impetus to write it was the fact that I do a lot of kind of archaeological writing about the first time we did this and the first time we did that, and the first time we made beer or grew wheat or all those kind of things. And lots of different things have been found in archaeological sites that suggest like the earliest time we ever did weaving, or the earliest time we ever kind of made pots and that kind of, and so I was really curious about the history, the really long history of lots of different crafts. And what really struck me when I was writing the book was actually that so many crafts are so ancient. I mean, truly, truly tens of thousands of years old. And that even there's even now a thought amongst archaeologists that crafts were being performed by not just Homo sapiens, but Neanderthals as well. And that the kind of, the ability to see a material and make something out of it and think efficiently about the material use and have an end goal in sight and all those kind of things when you're making craft could be something that's inherently kind of part of who we are. And the idea that you kind of, people naturally experiment materials and, basket weaving turned into weaving wool or hemp or all that kind of, all these kind of crafts all have loads of crossover. So yeah, that was the idea. So the crafted book was really a kind of an attempt for me to put all those kind of crafts in some kind of chronological order, and also try and group crafts together like metalworking and textiles and paper and woodworking and all that kind of stuff. And I found it really, really interesting. And that there isn't just kind of one center of craft in the world. Crafts happened all over the place and sprang up at all lots of different times and then disappeared. And then, and sometimes there was interchanged between communities and crafts spread that way. And, we basically have a huge history of making things, which is really interesting.
I suppose that probably, you mentioned your new book, that probably bleeds quite nicely into that.
So definitely. And I talk about things like, evidence for the first kind of timber framed buildings, or, the beginning of blacksmithing, or when we started, we split our ages up historically into what materials people were working with, so like Iron Age, Bronze Age, all that kind of thing, that still applies even today. And I find that really interesting, and how the introduction of a new material often changed a culture entirely, or meant that one culture managed to dominate another culture and would spread all over the world. And so the ability to craft stuff was often massively life changing. So as soon as people, for instance, worked out how to make iron, that was a complete game changer, because suddenly you didn't just make weapons with it, you could make tools with it, and then you could change your farmed landscape and how much you could farm changed. So you started to make more money, and with money comes power, and then power means you can subjugate more people, and so craft is often at the heart of loads of kind of big historical events. I wrote a book about how sheep changed history. So I think it's called a short history of the world according to sheep. And that a lot of that was about how when people mastered the art of wool and shearing and textiles, it was a complete game changer. So things like they think that the Vikings wouldn't have been able to conquer huge swathes of the world without the fact that they had such sophisticated wool and weaving industry that then they made these massive sails with, that allowed them to take these huge boats and navigate, right the way across to Canada, when everyone else was kind of piddling around in, little kind of canoes or whatever, coracles or whatever. And so craft is the ability to make stuff isn't just kind of fun. It's not just a nice thing to do. It's the difference between whether your culture is a winner or a loser, historically speaking anyway. So that was really interesting. And yeah, I kind of worry the fact that the term craft has been so diluted in modern times, and that, sticking bits of paper onto other bits of paper to create kind of nice collages, or, making knitted toilet roll holders, as I say, for me is not craft. That's kind of messy. And that sounds like I'm being really picky, but, it's not. that's just kind of playing. It's playing with materials. But for me, craft is something much more refined than that, and much more intelligent. There's a guiding intelligence underneath it all, and skill that's passed on, and, you know, specialized tools and all those kind of stuff. And it's something that we should really, really cherish. And I don't think we do. I don't think many people really understand how important it is. You know, being an amazing stonemason should be as respected as being, you know, a heart surgeon. I genuinely think that craft needs that kind of recognition of skill, and you know, it takes a lifetime to become a really amazing woodcarver or a really amazing, you know, jewelry maker, and yet we don't seem to kind of give people that kind of kudos.
That's really fascinating to hear. I mean, I've never really sat and thought while I'm crafting about the sort of how far back the links of that craft go. And certainly I'd never thought about basket weaving informing fabric weaving. That's a fascinating evolution that has just completely blown my mind a little bit.
Yeah. So to take that point, so archaeologists find evidence. So as soon as you can knot something, right, you can make a net, and as soon as you can make a net, then you're starting to work with threads in 3D or fibers in 3D, and so what starts off as maybe like using bits of reeds or strips of bark and things to make something useful like a net or a sieve. You know, you start to create the tighter weaves, and then you start thinking, well, maybe I need something finer material. And then, you know, then you start playing around with threads, and then you start to get onto animal fibers and things. And it's just, you know, it's the same skills applied to different materials to get completely different, completely different results, which is fascinating.
And then, you know, you get the specialists heading off in their individual area, and unique crafts are born. I feel wholly connected.
Yeah, well, know that, you know, the idea that crafts can come and go as well. You know, a craft is only often there because it fits a purpose, or, you know, there's a need for it. And as soon as there's a need for it anymore, they're quite quickly lost. I've done quite a lot of work with kind of endangered crafts, and so many crafts now, you know, people just don't do because we don't need them. And there's a big argument about whether you should try and keep those going or not, or whether it's just a natural kind of part of the evolution of craft. And whether you should bother trying to kind of teach people archaic craft techniques.
And where do you stand on that? I
think history, we learn a lot from history, and that often things come round in cycles. And so often we're often trying to reinvent the wheel a lot of the time, and that actually it's more useful to have some kind of repository of knowledge, even if it's just written down and recorded. It doesn't necessarily mean everyone has to be practicing that craft, but it would be good to know how to do it should we have to call on it again. And I think that's true with lots of things, you know, like plant knowledge, or, you know, we've lost more knowledge than I think we've probably gained over the years, and so especially kind of old building techniques and things now. You know, I think in the 1970s, people would have probably thought, what's the point of learning how to lime plaster, or how to, you know, be able to frame a timber framed house? And now everybody wants to know how to do those things because they're part and parcel of a building tradition that's a new one, which is really exciting. What do you think?
As you said, there's a sort of, in the 70s, no one thought we should keep lime plastering alive. And then, you know, it was just kept alive in a few little pockets. And now we're sort of digging into those pockets, and it's being used more widely. Certainly the same with clay building, sort of cob and you know, clay plasters now. The health benefits of a clay plastered house is you know, incredible. And that was a material that was very much sort of shunned and thought of as old fashioned, or, you know, peasant technology or mud hut kind of analogies. So to have learning things from a book is very different to learning things from a person who, you know, can say, oh, not quite like that, or, you know, the nuances that don't come across.
Yeah.
So I do think it's very important to sort of keep these
I agree. And funnily enough, there was a thing I was reading about the other day. So I was writing about how when in the sort of 1600s and early 1700s, there was a big hand knitting culture in Britain, and it was a way that people could make extra money between farming jobs, and it was often the women and the children who did it, but also men as well. And people knitted on their way to work and everything. And they'd use these things called knitting sheaths, which are like, I don't know if you've seen them. They look like they're just like a block of wood, often kind of beautifully carved, but you sort of tuck it under your arm and then you'd shove a knitting needle in the end of it. And it meant you could kind of hold it whilst you were knitting. But people talked about being able to, historically in the text, people talked about being able to do one-handed knitting because you were so busy, you could be literally doing something else or knitting with one hand. But no one knew how to do it because everyone now knits with two hands, right? And so sort of a group of knitters got together and they were kind of practicing and working out, and it took them ages to kind of work out what the technique was. And they don't even know if they've now got it right. But this is something that people across the board used to be able to do and was, you know, children could do. But people kind of just didn't know how to do it anymore. And it's not a particularly useful technique, but it's historically fascinating because, you know, if you ever do anything like a historical drama, or I'm always interested about what people are doing in the background in historical dramas. And, you know, I'm like, oh, are they doing is their blacksmithing, you know, forge actually accurate or all those, you know, you get quite nerdy about it. But, yeah, for lots of kind of historical, if you're interested in history, I think kind of getting those details right is probably important, which is why it's probably important to keep crafts alive, even the old ones.
Yeah. So we've talked about sort of old crafts. Your book talks about the newer crafts. And I was sort of struggling. I was thinking, what on earth is a new craft? And yeah, when do new crafts that you would consider not like the sticking bits of plastic on other bits of plastic, when are they? What sort of era are they appearing?
I'm trying to think what. I mean, it's quite a long time ago since I wrote.
Sorry, I'm asking you. This is old news
it's
in
fine.
your world.
No, it's fine. Yeah, no, it's probably. I mean, there's probably new tools and things that allow different processes to happen, or you know, crafts that were technique probably hand driven most of the time. You know, the advent of electricity probably changed fundamentally how people did those kind of things. Or you get old crafts but done in new ways, like, I don't know, you know, stained glass making has changed, or the way that people apply new design ideas to old crafts and that kind of thing. But I can't, I struggle with the idea of kind of plastic crafting and things because but then that's my own prejudices about plastic as a material and the fact that there isn't much room for a human imprint on something that's formed out of plastic. It doesn't kind of move in the same way as natural materials. But that's, you know, I'm sure someone could show me something made of plastic that they made and it would blow my mind. So, you know, I'm prepared to kind of have my mind changed about that. Yeah, but I think people are thinking of new things, new ways of doing things all the time. That's, you know, we're constantly inventing new techniques and new ways of doing things. Yeah, you don't get that many new crafts. Maybe I don't think developing these days. I think you sometimes get like breakaway ideas, like where craft joins another discipline. So craft and activism, say, for instance. So the idea that you can do something political with a craft. So like, you know, you get like guerrilla gardening or, you know, crochet bombing and stuff like that, where you're saying a kind of political statement, which I think is brilliant. Or linking, there's quite a lot of work with craft and memory and Alzheimer's and working with old people, which is a really interesting avenue that people are exploring, and the ability of craft to kind of jog people's memories. So yeah, I like the crossover where it's mixed with the sort of interesting other topics. One thing that sort of modern craft I think is really good for is community. And I sort of get the impression that probably, you know,
blacksmithing back sort of when it was in its heyday didn't have that community. It was just sort of it was quite functional. And now we've got this new, people gather together at blacksmithing conventions, or they come together, and it's actually sort of created this whole really positive thing for people's mental health and well-being.
I totally agree with you, and that blacksmithing in the past would have been almost a career that you would have had to compete with somebody else, because you can only have one blacksmith in a village kind of mentality. Mm-hmm. But now that people feel that it's a shared connection, and people are happy to share techniques and ideas, possibly because there isn't that kind of competition for livelihood, maybe, or just that the world's a different place. I actually don't know if there was a community of blacksmiths before. There might have been a guild in medieval times. I'm not sure, but yeah, you get the impression that often crafts in the past were quite jealously guarded, because they're what differentiated you from Mr. Ordinary, mm-hmm. and that if you could do this really amazing craft, then that was a status symbol, but it was also potential of earning more money. So you would guard it with your life, and you wouldn't kind of share secrets. You'd only pass them down to, say, a male relative, or mm-hmm. Your own apprenticeship. So now that kind of imperative's gone, then things can be a bit more shared, I suppose. I love the idea of all burly blacksmiths getting together and having a nice shared community. That's lovely.
Drinking some ale from flagons.
Yeah, exactly. Clinking flagons, that's it. Tweaking their beards.
One thing I'm interested in to do with craft is the sort of link to sustainability. I find so the last podcast with Dave Cockcroft, and he was talking about linking you back to nature. He's a spoon carver, and you learn the trees, you learn appreciation for nature, you want to look after that thing. And I sort of, in my head, I think all craft must equal sustainability, because I'm mostly woodwork based. Do you think that rings true throughout other crafts?
I think generally yes, and I've written a bit about craft and sustainability before. That in it, good craft is about understanding materials, and B, not wasting them. And so those two kind of principles, unless money is no object and you can literally rip through materials like it doesn't matter. And I don't know many craft people that are like that. Usually, if they're crafting for a livelihood, they're really careful about what they do. So, so those kind of two practical reasons really inform craft work to be sustainable. But there's also there's a kind of artistic pleasure as well, I think, in craft, of being really judicious with materials. And if you can make a beautiful bowl from literally the smallest block of wood you can find, that's an amazing mental process as well. That's your creativity making something, you're making the best of something with the least amount of materials. And so there's a kind of, that's where your skill and your flair is shown as well. So craft is, I think, craft and sustainability are very comfortable bedfellows, and most crafters understand the importance of being careful with materials and understanding the properties of inherent properties of different materials. So, you pick and choose very carefully. It's just it's a level of kind of connoisseurship about materials that you just don't get when in mass production, or at least that's how I see it.
So I was very pleased to see that lime plastering and thatch were in your crafted book, but I'd never really considered them craft. To me, they're building. And I wondered, is there a line? Or is it where does one meet the other?
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're looking for all things BMX racing, you've found the right podcast. Here at Lane 8 BMX Podcast, I'll speak to the local racer, the national racer, and even the Olympic level racers. I'm talking kids to the weekend warriors and much more. So get comfortable, turn up the volume, and remember to snap on green.
So it all comes back to what your definition of craft is. So if some, what is craft? And for me, craft is about using materials, usually natural materials, to produce an end product that is, its primary purpose is useful, is utility, not an artistic statement, but it can be beautiful if you want it to be. And that there is often a deep level of skill and gained knowledge to be able to do that thing. You couldn't just give someone off the street a big bale of hay or straw and say, right, thatch me that roof, please. You couldn't do it because so there's a set of skills that comes with that craft. And so for me, that's kind of craft. It's the skills plus the materials plus the knowledge, plus the practical outcome, but done with finesse. And so thatching is absolutely up there for me, and most building crafts are, because not anyone can do them. They take loads of time to learn, and when people are really good at them, they are really good at them. I could watch someone lime plaster for hours on end, and I've done lime plastering, and I'm terrible at it. And when people are good at it, it's such a joy to watch, and the end product is such a joy to touch. And same with thatching. You see beautiful bits of thatch work, and you just think, that's artistry. So yes, the short answer is yes. Lots of building trades are crafts as well, because not any old person could do them.
And then, so you mentioned that you've got a new book coming out soon. Remind me of the title.
It's thank you for asking. It's a brief history of the countryside in 100 objects. So a history of the world in 100 objects obviously came out a while ago, and was brilliant. And the idea that objects can tell a story is a really powerful idea, and especially for someone like me who likes, my way into things is often objects. It's kind of touchy things, and then from there you can kind of talk about ideas, right? And but it struck me that a lot of the things that were in the original book, History of the World, in 100 Objects, were about urban life. They're about great rulers, great civilizations, urban life, all these big moments in history. And I'm not really massively interested in big moments in history. I'm interested in normal people and the countryside and everyday life, and also for pretty much until only about 200 years ago, we were predominantly country dwellers. We didn't live in cities. We lived off the land, and so our history is the history of the countryside. That's who we are as people, and so I really wanted to kind of delve into that, and I didn't really know what my objects were going to be before I set off with the book, and I just kind of followed my nose. And some of them are kind of, extraordinary, and they talk about, they reveal the relationship that we had with wildlife and farm animals, and when we started, farming, and how we built our buildings and how we solved problems. And I'm full of admiration for our ancestors, that how they solved all these problems without having cars, electric power, running water. It's true heroism. But at the same time, there's a lot of kind of warfare and disease and people being not very nice to each other in the book as well. But I kind of like that. I kind of like those bits too, because the gruesome bits are always the interesting, the interesting bits too. When you kind of come to country, so there's lots of hangings and plague and terrible diseases and things. So it's it's a real romp through history, really. And so it's been fascinating to write.
Nice. Can you tell us just one item?
I always dread this question. So I was thinking, just off the top of my head, one of the items that's it must have been, it's about roughly about 1700s, is a glass bottle of medicine, and the the title on it is lumbricus, and that means earthworm. And so that whole object speaks of a time when earthworms were viewed as a medicine, that people used earthworms as a medicine for lots of different things, but partly because people would watch what happened to earthworms when they, for instance, were split in two when you were gardening, and they were fascinated by the fact that earthworms seemed to survive that process. And so earthworm medicine was used for lots of things to do with wounds that people have, where we wanted some kind of healing. So that was one bit that was interesting about the object. But then when I did more research into how people viewed soil and earthworms and the role that earthworms played in soil, it revealed a whole kind of different attitude towards soil health that people had, where almost everything was a pest. So earthworms should be destroyed, moles should be destroyed, insects should be, everything was something that should be killed. And so there are lots of kind of agricultural and farmers' treaties from around that time that basically say, you have to go out and you have to find as many earthworms as you can and kill them and scald them and pour lime over them and all this kind of thing, because what you want is animal-free soil or creature-free soil. And now, what we know now is that obviously, I've written a book about earthworms, is that they're underground heroes. They basically do all the important work of soil health. And so that object of this kind of funny earthworm medicine bottle doesn't just speak of kind of odd attitudes towards health and healing, but also our entire view of how we viewed the soil and what we thought was good, healthy soil, and how that's changed over time. So that's kind of one example. But there are lots of kind of curious bits of kind of objects. And another good one is a mummified cat or a dried cat. I'm fascinated by superstitions, and so the practice of, and you'll be interested in this because it's timber framed houses, and a lot of timber framed houses, sort of pre-1800s, you often find a lot of objects, builders in particular, put and hide in buildings for ritual purposes, for anti-superstition. So things like, you find cats, mice, sometimes eggs, but and also witches' marks and things like that. The domestic home was somewhere that had to be protected constantly from potentially kind of harmful forces. And so, home building wasn't just about making a home and making somewhere that was protected from the elements, but it was also somewhere that had to kind of spiritually protect you as well. And so one of the things that people did was to basically bury cats in the wall or in boundaries. So you often find them under thresholds or near windows. Well, that's a really good question. So mostly no. Most of them seem to have been interred after they were dead, thank the Lord. But you do find occasionally, there's a brilliant example of at a museum in London, in an old it was an old trade hall or something that was being renovated. They found a kind of one of these burials or whatever, but it was behind a fireplace, and that they'd put a bottle, some other items, and a hen, and then bricked them all in. And the hen had gone on to lay a couple of eggs while it was waiting its kind of dreadful fate, and then keeled over, obviously. But so occasionally they were live things, but most of the time they were. I can't imagine it's probably that easy to inter a live cat, because it probably put up a bit of a fight. But yeah, but just and so you find them stuffed up chimneys and lots of different places, and so I love that kind of. That's tapping into Iron Age, ideas about foundation sacrifices, and and when you built a building, you had to kind of thank the deities and make sure that it was going to be protected and all that kind of, and we're still doing that in the 1800s, and you just think, that's 2,000 years later, we're still doing, they're still doing the same things, and human culture doesn't change that much, it seems.
Yes. While it seems, surface level, we're racing away, but actually we're all rooted in the same
yeah.
same
I
weirdness.
bet you've got a dead cat hidden somewhere in your house.
Well, it wouldn't be a
Haven't
project
we all?
without a dead cat.
Exactly.
All right, Sally, thank you so much. Brilliant to end on some dead cat chat. So a huge thanks to Sally for sparing all that time to talk with us. I had such a good time listening to the way that she described a lot of the things I feel about building and about craft and sustainability and all the intermeshing of them. But I don't have the words of an author. So it was really lovely to hear those words spoken out loud by her, because they really were so in tune with my thinking. So do go and check out Sally's books. There are links in the descriptions. A reminder that Hive will give a little kickback to me and also give a kickback to your local independent bookstore. So I think they are the best option for new books. Obviously try and buy secondhand if possible. In the show notes, there are links to Lee John Phillips's Shed project, the Carpenter Oak timber frame grand designs, Thomas Heatherwick, Why Boring Buildings Are Bad for Us. There's a link to that gargoyle on the BBC website. Link to History of the World in 100 Objects, that book. That's not Sally's one, that's the one that she's sort of playing off. Yeah, as always, a whole load of stuff to get into if you have enjoyed this podcast. If this was your first episode, or your second hopefully, then do subscribe to make sure not to miss any future episodes, and do look back through the 100 or so other podcasts. And if you would like to hear more about biophilic design, there is a great episode, number 47, with Bill Browning and Katie Ryan, when they talk through the biophilic design patterns. Really good one if that is a new topic for you. If you get a second, please do share this episode on whatever social media you're on. That really helps lots more people hear it. If you want to support the podcast financially, then head to patreon.com/building sustainability. You get loads more bonus audio there. I think that's it from me. I've been slightly croaky voiced, just incredibly entertained by Sally. I hope that you're all well, and until next time, bye bye.